for extraterrestrial projects. I am have worked with the Natural Heritage, the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program for a while, since 2019. And I also am a member of Earthseed Land Collective in Durham. And I'm not speaking for any of those particular organizations today. So we're going to be talking about some general themes in conservation work, native plants and all that kind of good stuff. So I'm not speaking from any particular organizational standpoint, if that makes any sense, right? None of my organizations officially endorse the message that I'm getting ready to say, and none of them likely would disagree with it. Okay, so here is what I think I've learned in my time as a botanist, as a conservationist, as a person who likes green stuff. This is the thesis of the talk. I'll give it to you just straight out of the gate. If we focused on the 25 native food plants that we find in our area, all of our conservation goals would be solved. Let me say that again. If we focused on the 25 most important native food plants of our area, our conservation goals would be solved. Okay, our pollinator goals would be solved. Some of our cultural things would be solved. Our ideas of using medicine as food as medicine, a lot of our food insecurity stuff would be solved. I'll go into more detail about what I mean, but I'm giving you the general gist. Okay. One of the most important things to remember about, and I'm going to sit to this in the Southeast and more specifically in North Carolina, and I'll even go even more specific into the Piedmont of North Carolina. What has happened to this land is the product of plantations. Point blank, period. There's no other way to think about it. From a naturalist standpoint or from a botanist standpoint, what people, when they arrived in the Piedmont of North Carolina, when Europeans arrived in the Piedmont of North Carolina to settle in the 1750s, their mind was to create plantations. There was no other reason, okay? These were people who were mostly coming from Virginia and then later from other parts. But their idea was to expand the plantation system that had already been started, first of all in England, then to Ireland, and then to what would become the United States. So everything is based on that. The way that we experience our landscape that we walk through every day is through a plantation-based lens. We are still recovering from the effects of plantation-based agriculture that started in the 1750s here in Central North Carolina. Okay, that's number one. And in the disruption, in the establishment of these plantation systems, it disrupted indigenous food systems. It disrupted indigenous ways of life. It interrupted indigenous land management, which was all based in providing what all humans need for, right? Building materials, fiber, medicine, and food. Okay, so that act and that series of acts over that time disrupted all of this, right? During my time with the Natural Heritage Program, one of the things I wanted to work on was trying to figure out, because we track rare plants and endangered, rare, and threatened plants, is why were these plants endangered, right? Why were they in trouble? And for some plants are rare in North Carolina because they've reached their ecological limit. We're at the northern limit or southern limit, right? You can't do anything about that, right? That's just the natural range of the plant. Some plants have very conservative reproductive strategies, right? Some plants fell into that category. Not many, but a few. But most plants were rare because of habitat loss. And that did not just start 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. That started with the habitat loss based on the conversion of these indigenously managed spaces into plantations, right? The rerouting of waterways, the changes in hydrology, the changes in soil, all of these things equals habitat loss. Some of the rare plants that we have, like here, even here in Durham, Echinacea laevigata, and some of the rare wild quinine, that stuff is the easiest stuff in the world to grow. It doesn't need any special conditions, right? It is literally, what the special conditions it needs is to not be plowed. That's the special condition it needs, and to have full sun. Those are the only two things it needs. It can grow in all kinds of soil types and all sorts of conditions. It just does not, it can't take plowing. It won't come back after you plow it. So in thinking through this, what happens, right, if we start to focus not on all these various conservation goals of here's pollinators over here, here is rare plants over here in this area, here is, storm water over here, here is all these things. What happens if we start to think about food through an indigenous lens, right? Because the food that we eat here in the United States presently is all based on a European model. How we acquire food, the row cropping system, is all based on that same plantation model, right? So then the question is, well, what were indigenous people eating? All kinds of things, right? All kinds of things. And yes, they were doing their own row cropping version of things that would be something like row cropping, growing specifically carbohydrates like grains, like corn, or things like, that need some protection from animals, like squash and pumpkins and those kinds of things, and beans that need some protection from animals, otherwise the animals will eat them. And a lot of their food systems were based on this semi-cultivation. We don't have an English translation for that because we don't have the concept. It's semi-cultivation, right? Things that are not in rows, but that are actively managed. It may be managed by burning, it may be managed by thinning, it may be managed by scattering seed every 2 years, it may be managed by any number of things, but this is light touch management, but this is still part of the agricultural. Again, I don't have a good way to describe it because we don't have a system that mimics it here, right? It is this half cultivation, half wild, whatever. I can't really describe it well using English terms. West Africa is the same way. We have the same system, right? And again, I have a West African word that I could use that would encompass that whole complex of both row crops and the things that are just on the periphery of those things that are, again, half managed or not so highly managed as being plowed and planting specific things in specific places. Anyway, if we start to focus on the native food crops, right, which grow in diverse habitats across North Carolina, even in our area, it would solve so many of our conservation goals. Let me give you an example. One of the most important, a really beautiful plant that we can both eat, is helpful for pollinators, is nodding onion. It's Allium cernuum, okay? Also highly culturally important to indigenous people of the Southeast. If you know about Choctaw people or Cherokee people, especially in Oklahoma, they have this tradition of the wild onion dinners in the springtime. And the wild onion in that wild onion dinner is Allium cernuum, the nodding onion. It's a big cultural event. People go out together and gather them, come back, cook a big feast for the whole community that is based on wild onions and eggs. And the wild onion there is Allium cernuum. If you planted Allium cernuum, you'll know that it tastes amazing, much more delicious than that garlic grass that people try to convince you to eat, which is terrible. It doesn't matter what you do to it, it's terrible. It's not really edible to me. Allium cernuum is delicious. And if you've let it grow long enough, you will see that it also produces incredible flowers that are, one, beautiful, and two, that are beloved by bees. So just that one species helps us to be able to We have our cultural impact there of being able to do this sort of collective foraging. We have a nutritional aspect from actually eating these. We have a pollinator impact from there. But the most important thing about this is that this is a perennial. There's not something that needs to be planted every year, right? What you do have to do is manage the area in which it lives, which it needs basically full sun, semi-shade to full sun, which then means that you're going to have to manage the area where it lives. And like most systems, this is not going to be a single species where this is the only thing living there, right? So in addition to this, to Allium cernuum, lots of other things can grow beside Allium cernuum that need the same kind of sort of dry, semi-shade to full sun, right? And so what you're able to do now, so not if you're managing for Allium cernuum, you're also managing for a whole host of other plants that need that kind of condition without managing them for them specifically, right? So that's just one example. Let me give you a second example. Spice bush. Spice bush, you might know, Lindera benzoin, a very important plant for pollinators. It's the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail. A beautiful butterfly. It's one of the few things that it can host on besides sassafras. But spice bush has a long historical culinary history among indigenous people of the Southeast. It's accompanied usually when people are eating bear. Spice bush is the main flavoring that people use for it. Not to mention the leaves as tea and the berries in various stages of their ripeness. In the green stage, they sort of taste like black pepper, and in the red stage, if they're green and then dried, they sort of taste like black pepper. And red and then dried, they sort of taste like allspice, right? If we are focusing on our indigenous plants as food, right, and they have a very specific places that they grow. They basically grow in bottomland, pretty rich soil. So if we are managing for spice bush production, right, as our local, let's say that we have a local spice trade, and with spice bush is the basis of it. We are managing bottomland forests, right? And they need pretty mature forests where you have a high canopy, right, and pretty stable understory. Those are two examples, right? I can move on to things like duck potato, which is what's the common name for that? What's the scientific name? Sagittata latifolia, which now you're in the wetlands, right? We could go on. We could manage for things like Jerusalem artichokes. Now you're on the prairie, right? You can manage for service berries. Now you're in this sort of food forest, savanna type area. You can manage for maypops, Passiflora incarnata. You're in the field. You're in sort of the half cultivated field area, right? All these different places that can be managed for food, right? We could think about acorn and acorn production, hickories and hickory production, right? For flour, for syrup, for tapping these trees for syrup, for the actual carbohydrates that are produced by the seeds. Like, let's see if we had a hickory industry in which we collected hickory nuts, could totally be a thing. But now somebody is managing for hickories, right? So if we are managing, it is a delicious hickory dish. If you ever find yourself in Oklahoma and you are around Cherokee people and they allow you to have this, I haven't had it yet. It's called kanuchi. It is made out of hickory nuts. It's like a hickory nut soup. But people talk so highly of it, and I am dying to have it. If you find yourself in Eastern Band Cherokee land, you'll find them eating pokeweed. You'll find them eating green-headed coneflower. You'll find them eating chestnut bread. You'll find them drinking spice bush tea. You will find them eating ramps, eating this whole suite of things that are wild, right? But that allow us to have this very tight relationship with our natural world that gives us reasons to manage for very particular things. And then in that management of this particular thing that we're after, we're managing on a habitat and on a landscape scale, right? In the same way that people who manage for red-cockaded woodpeckers, once you start managing for them, you're managing for an entire ecosystem that they need to that they need to thrive in, right? So this is the same kind of idea applied to specific species that we need for food, right? Both has been useful in the past as food, and my argument is that will be continue to be useful in the future for food, right? As we try to figure out better ways to feed people that are more sustainable, that are ecologically have ecological longevity, and that have these cultural pieces connected to them. And I think I'm about at my time of 15 minutes. Is that right, Tanya? I'm not watching the clock closely, but it should look pretty close. But I want to give a shout out to some of the folks.
Keep going. I think, well, we just need to reserve some time for questions, and we can have conversation about what you're talking about till about 11:45.
Perfect. Okay.
We've got plenty of time.
Okay, good. So some of this stuff I have learned through my own exploration, like literally working in my own garden and my own farm and whatever, and also by being in relationship with indigenous people here, right? I have a large greater debt of gratitude to to folks from the Ocraneechi Band of Saponi Nation, to Eastern Band people on the Kuala boundary who have brought me into their communities and allowed me to learn a lot of this stuff. Yeah, but part of this is food feels so central to this conversation. And it brings everybody sort of back together, and where we find ourselves in all these disparate spaces. We find ourselves looking at the landscape, architecture piece of it, like the beauty of it, the gardening aspect of it. We find ourselves on the pollinator side. We find ourselves on the people who are interested in herbalism, people who are interested in fiber, people who are interested in dyeing, people who are just interested in food, right? And so of all those spaces, all the humans have some interest in there, right? For the most part, the people who are here on this call and who are interested in this are interested in this in a way that we're going to be in. The people on this call are going to be interested in this no matter. We're already interested in it. We're not the people who we need to convince, right? So what the question now is, and which I've seen sort of many conservation always asking, is how do we involve people in this project? How do we involve people in the project of managing land, of caring about land, of caring about this thing, right? And the answer is it has to be meaningful in people's lives. It has to be meaningful in people's lives. And the truth of the matter is what we're experiencing here in the United States is we are living a European lifestyle on indigenous land. It's present in our farming. It's present in the way that we use land. It's just so clear to me. I had a chance to go to Germany just in February. And if you want to know where we get here in Central North Carolina, where we get our land management techniques from, it's there. The way that they manage land and the way that we manage here it looked identical, right? The sharp lines between the field and the forest, even what they reserved as forest land, right? That was sort of unbroken mass of trees are the same. It's exactly the same way we manage land here. Like it was astonishing. It was astonishing in its identicalness. Right. And I was like, wow, am I in Cincinnati? Am I in Alamance County, North Carolina? Am I in the whole country is so heavily influenced by this management style, which is, very clearly German, sort of Western European, but German more so than anywhere else. I've been to other places in Europe and it didn't look and feel like this, Germany specifically. And so I want to invite us to step out of the European way of seeing the world, which is hard to do because it is everywhere, right? It is how this version has been constructed. But to start to think about what does it mean to manage our land for food, and not for row crops like wheat or potatoes or sweet potatoes, but what does it look like to manage our land for food that is also then going to be helpful for pollinators, helpful for stormwater, helpful for soil conservation, helpful for all these cultural aspects, right? That is, to me, the ultimate question, because as I found myself in many different conservation organizations and many different ideas of thinking about how to make this work, I kept coming to the same issue, always rounded around to the same issue, is how, why is this like that? And so it turns out the way that things start is often how they'll end. And so let's just get to the end, which is actually going back to the beginning. And so, but this also necessarily means like changing some of the ways that we eat. It means necessarily changing the way that we are interfacing with land in general. Like, is this the source? Do we, when we think about having a need met in our life, do we think about our local area being able to meet it? And the answer to that, I can answer the question for you. The answer is no. If we think about where our fiber and our textile comes from, do we think that could be met by our local need? Nope. If we're thinking about where our clay pottery is going to come from, or where our furniture is going to come from, do we think that there's a local source to meet that need? No. Right? And this is not necessarily anybody who's, this is not our fault who's on the call, or most people that you would talk to, but this has become, because the sort of the plantation system then morphed into these sort of factory systems, right? In fact, sometimes plantations were called factories, even in that time. And so because we have so much of our products, and even in our agricultural world, has been turned into a corporation, the way that we interface with goods and resources is through a corporate structure, right? So I'm inviting us, right, as people who are part of your own individual organizations and your representations of what organizations, to think about ourselves and our lives and our needs, your own personal needs and the needs of the people around you. What is it like to think about those outside of the lens of a corporation, outside of the lens of a European corporate lens? Right? I think I'll leave it there and leave time for questions.
Perfect, thank you. Who has questions for Justin?
I will jump out there. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's very inspiring, Justin. My community, we have a property where we have a community garden and food forest growing, but we're also starting a new project at a church in our neighborhood where we've kind of converted an area that was grass, and we're going to convert it into, we're thinking a pollinator garden, a mixture of perennials and annuals and some food. But this is like made me rethink the whole thing. Instead of just putting in flowers, maybe we're putting in things, more food for people to eat and access. And so I definitely like to, I'm interested in learning more about native plants now, things that were actually grown here beforehand. So thank you a lot for this information. It was great.
You're welcome. And one of the things, I'm not an herbalist. I don't consider myself an herbalist. And one of the things that I have found so helpful in the growing of native plants is their herbal properties, right? I have seasonal eczema, which is very strange. I used 3 plants to heal it. Baptisia tinctoria, which is sometimes known as horsefly weed. Lake figwort, which people plant as a pollinator plant, and yarrow. These are all pollinator plants, beautiful plants, plants that we would plant. People don't really plant Baptisia tinctoria like that, but they should. It's beautiful and so helpful. So look at all the things that combination of plants has taken the eczema away, the issues of eczema this summer away from me. So look at so even if you do decide to just keep that a perennial garden, remember that this is both food, fiber, pollinators, medicine. And once we start to integrate ourselves back into these systems, right, we start to see that this becomes a community, a place where communities can come together, right? Because if this is where the resources are, the people will be there. Don't people gather at the grocery store? Yes. Why? Because that's where the resources are. Don't people gather at Lowe's and Home Depot? Yes, because that's where the resources are. People, if the resources are in a particular place, people are going to come there.
Awesome. Okay, we have a couple other hands up. Dale Everts.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. This is really inspiring and confirming. I got my degree many centuries ago in crop and soil science at NC State. Obviously, didn't learn any of this. Learned the plantation approach, and but over years, just picking it up, learned some of this. But this is the way you've captured it is really really quite special and useful. Question I have is, do you have a list of the 25 plants?
I do. And I'll share them with you for the low price to subscribe to my course for 6 weeks. No, I'm kidding. I do, and I'll send them to Talia so she can send them to share them with the rest of the
Great. Because I mean, I assume these are the sorts of things we should be planning here amongst, as we're thinking about either landscaping or gardens or whatever. Yeah. Thanks.
And I just chose 25 as an arbitrary number. It could be as high as 60, right?
Right.
25, I wanted to keep the number accessible into people's minds, right? The numbers start to get too large and people are like, no. 25 is a number that people can hold mentally.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good question. And Preston, your hand is up.
Hi, Justin. Thank you. This is really inspiring, and I apologize to everyone on the call for beating and banging early on before I realized my microphone was on. But Justin, I work a lot in conservation efforts in development and in the urban environment. And I'm wondering if you could describe to us also your vision for bringing this information to a variety of contexts, whether that is in development, in wilder places, and places in between, like suburban environments. What sort of context do you imagine us beginning to reclaim this original idea that you're describing?
Food, cooking. One of the most important way to do this is to have people eat the food, and it has to seem like food. One of the issues that I have with like wild crafters and that kind of thing is sometimes they're going to give you a bunch of nettle cookies. That's not going to convince anybody, okay? It needs to be and seem like food, right? And to that, we look to indigenous cuisine to take our cues, right? Again, getting to eat Cherokee food in Cherokee country, they are literally using the wild plants that are literally around and transforming it into something that is clearly recognizable as food, right? Is very, very inspiring. It is very, very inspiring and does not need that much explanation, right? Now, getting people to try these foods and whatever, that's usually we do that with kids or through festivals or any number of ways. But the food is like a Trojan horse. You can sort of sneak in all kinds of things, and people know this. That's how you trick kids to go into vacation Bible school, is with food, right? So this is a tactic that people already know. We do it with food, and I don't mean this to sort of be a tricking people into anything. I don't mean that, but having people being introduced to something in a situation or in a manner in which they might not otherwise try it. If you're going to go out on a hike, it may be hard to get somebody to go out on a hike with you. Maybe they have mobility issues. Maybe they don't like bugs. Maybe they feel afraid of the woods. There's a whole host of reasons why people would not go on a hike with you. Maybe they don't like the sunlight, whatever. But inviting people to a meal does not have any of those connotations with it, right? And so you still get to be in the space and be in relationship with these plants, but in a totally different way, in a way that sort of feels controlled, right? In a way that may not feel so jarring or may not make people reach so far out of where they currently are, right? So we want to meet people where they are. I mean, we say this phrase all the time, but I really mean that. Take the food to them. Do wild onions and eggs, but it also means that you have to have enough wild onions and eggs around you to be able to provide that resource, right? So we're at this sort of this moment, which is what I'm spending a lot of time doing, is making sure that we have enough of the resource to share, right? More wild onions, plant more.
Wonderful. That response really resonates, Justin. And I'm wondering if allies on this call, if maybe there's some opportunities for an intervention like this at Durham City Park or even Raleigh City Farm, which already has a functioning food forest, but largely with a global range of fruiting species.
And that's fine too. And we want to be able to make sure that people have access to the easy thing, right? Here locally, where I live in North Durham, there's a CVS that planted a bunch of service berries as a part of a landscaping thing. You know where me and my daughters go pick service berries? At CVS, because that's where they are. That's where we go. We made, so they're 5, and so we made service berry lemonade, which we call dazzleberry lemonade. But look what I was able to do, right? We went to a place that's very controlled, right? Literally, it's at CVS. We picked our service berries. We ate as many as we could stand there. We took some home. We turned them into lemonade. And now we had a whole thing that is around this plant that is local, has provided food for us, has provided a cultural, quote unquote, cultural experience for us. And now that my children now have a positive association with this plant, right? With this process, right? Without having to do a whole presentation.
Awesome. Thank you. Margaret has a question.
Yeah, my service berry tree that I planted in my front yard that I got from Keep Durham Beautiful finally had berries this year. So next year I'll have to try dazzleberry lemonade. That sounds awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Justin. Always love learning from you. And I'm wondering, from what you were talking about at the very end about, the risks of the corporate structure and sort of capitalist mindset that we have, and then trying to build the audience for these native plants and native food things, are there, as we see success in the commercialization of these native species, are there things that we need to look out for, ways that we need to avoid them becoming just kind of commercialized like everything else in a plantation system, or by their nature of being native, are they kind of exempt from that? What would you recommend?
Yeah, native plants do not do well in a plantation system. That is how plantation systems work. Do you see any native species in plantation systems? No, because it doesn't work. Right? If it doesn't work, that is a necessity of a plantation system. You literally have to uproot the plant from wherever it is its native home and take it somewhere far away. All of our major food crops basically are like that, with the exception of corn, right? Corn is grown and it's essentially, and it's part of its whatever the native range of corn is. Now we're in a whole different sort of conversation, but generally no. Again, maybe corn being the exception, but it is much harder to turn a lot of these plants into plantation worthy projects. Now, a lot of the 1700s was spent looking for plants all over the world that could handle plantation-based agriculture. Kew Gardens in London, the Chelsea Physic Garden in London spent a lot of time, decades, figuring this out. Okay, so some of these plants do not work well in the plantation system. That's one. So it's kind of have a natural buffer against that. Number 2 is that part of what we're after is having these things be so abundant that there's no money to be made off of commercializing these things, right? It's really, one of the things that's true is that you go to a place like Nigeria, it's really hard to sell mangoes. Not that you can buy them, of course, but they're everywhere. And there are some fruits that people eat that you can't even sell because they're just so common. Right? And pawpaw is another one that's super common in Nigeria. I've never seen it for sale. I'm sure it's for sale somewhere, but the trees are everywhere. You don't have to. It has sort of out-commoned itself out of being sold, and so that's ultimately part of to me, would be part of the larger goal, is that we are able to take. Now we need to buy and sell things. It's not like overturn trading. No, but certain things should be easy for us to gather. Our leafy green should be easy for us to gather. Our fruits should be easy for us to gather. They should be growing sort of all around us, right? And I'll say this about leafy greens: all around the world, pretty much how people who eat leafy greens, not everybody, they're all weeds. Even things like kale and collard greens in their native homeland, they're weeds. Spinach in its native homeland is a weed. What people eat as leafy greens are typically weeds, things that are extremely common that you don't have to do very much work to get. That is also true here, right? The main greens of indigenous people here in the Southeast are pokeweed, which I already mentioned. A plant, Solanum nigrum, one of the nightshades, also kind of a weed. What's the other one? Spiderwort, also kind of a weed. And there's another, lamb's quarters, also a weed. That is the pattern across the world, right? Is that the leafy vegetables are weeds. And so you don't want to be spending a lot of your necessary energy trying to cultivate leafy vegetables. That should be something you just go out and get, okay? So the things we want to look for is that making these things so abundant that it is hard to market them, that it is hard to sell them, right? Not because we want to take away market share from people, but that we want people to have more access to food that is nutritious, that is cost almost nothing, except for a little bit of your time and know-how, and that these plants also are here to support the general environment, right? Lamb's quarter is also a plant that is useful to our ecology, not just for human beings, but is also useful to our ecology. I mean, we mentioned nodding onion. There's a whole host of leafy greens that we can eat that most people don't know anything about. And so the plan, the ultimate goal would be is to have more autonomy as our local communities that are not just depending upon corporations for the bulk of our caloric needs.
Thank you. I really like that idea of the abundance being there, and then the market kind of becomes for your skills and time, so that if you know how to make value-added products, then you can market those, but everybody has the access and the option. I like seeing that with black walnuts. I feel like I've had black walnut ice cream, black walnut tinctures, black walnut beer, and I haven't made any of those things, but I have a black walnut tree and I could if I got around to it.
If you so chose, right? But we need to have, and so this is my sort of call, is to, like, we need to plant more, right? We need to plant more of these plants so that the resource, the raw material, if you will, is there to use, right? I just mentioned late figwort and butterfly, whatever did I mention? Horsefly weed, Black Peasia tinctoria. If we had more of that, now everybody does not need to be me and go foraging out in the middle of, wherever to go find those. But if somebody is selling eczema cream made out of those things, made locally and from a way that made sense to us, I would have bought it. I don't find it, particularly, necessary to go foraging for those things. If somebody already has provided this product for me and I'm having an issue, I feel totally fine going to purchase that from somebody.
Cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's definitely been inspiring, Justin. Any last words before we move on to our announcements and general discussion?
No, thank you all for listening. Yeah, I'll provide that list of my 25 plants. Yeah, and I'd love to have this. I'd love to keep this idea train sort of moving.
Keep us posted. Anytime you have news, we can share it on the listserv, or you're welcome to join our listserv also. which you can find on the website that is in the chat. Okay, let's open to announcements and sharing. If anybody would like to just speak up or raise their hands, either one is fine.
I wanted to do a quick plug for the prairie that Justin and Extraterrestrial Projects planted on Blackwell Street. If any of you guys haven't heard of it or haven't been, or yeah, if Justin, you feel free to chime in, but they planted a beautiful prairie that we sometimes help them maintain with volunteers. It's right at the beginning of the American Tobacco Trail, like right at Blackwell and Moorhead. And there's parking there. Right now it's full of some Asclepias and there's some Coreopsis. If you go in mid-May, there's a bunch of wild strawberries, which Justin loves to talk about how he planted a few and then they just sort of took over, and they must have wanted to be here. They must be happy. Also, PBS North Carolina did a really great segment with Extraterrestrial Projects, interviewing Justin and Tara May, who is another part of Extraterrestrial Projects, that's available on their website that I linked in the chat. Also, Justin has a really great Instagram account and has these presentations that he does periodically. I don't know if Justin, if you feel comfortable with me sharing your or account, if you have another one that is like more professional or whatever. But
Nope, that's the one.
The Country Gentleman Cooks.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really great account. But yeah, anyways, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. We have announcement about the Festival for the Eno coming up on July 4th. The link to the website. Dawn, would you like to share about B-Day?
Yep. So on Saturday, June 22nd, we're hosting our 3rd annual B-Day celebration at Durham Central Park from 9 a.m. to noon. We are looking for volunteers. We're looking for people to table. If your organization, especially if it's related to like pollinator health in some way, we would love to have you there. Linking to it in the chat. And I think we're also going to be at Lakeview Park this coming Saturday, June 15th, for the Bragtown Merrickmore Juneteenth celebration. I think that's 2 to 6.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to chime in on that. So thanks, Don. So the Bragtown, well, Juneteenth celebrations start this coming Saturday. There will be a week long of celebrations starting on Saturday the 15th, going into the following week. And across, many different communities in Durham, including Walltown and Ville Street Corridor, Hayti Center, and all of that. But Bragtown is kicking off this coming Saturday at the Lakeview Park from 2 to 6 p.m. Merrickmore is supporting Bragtown in their Juneteenth efforts this year. A lot of great entertainment going. We've got a couple of African drum bands. There'll be a history panel that's going to present. We'll have singing and dancing and lots of vendors present and food trucks, of course, so everyone gets to eat as well. So love to have you come out.
Hillary, I was wondering if not Hillary. Sorry if gosh, why can't I find the comment that I was wanting to? If Natalie could talk a little bit more, if you're able to, about the event that you were mentioning in September.
Yes,
I haven't heard of that organization.
Right. So,
Maurice, can everyone hear me okay? Is there like a back echo or anything? No?
Nope,
Okay, great. So Indigenous Memories is an organization that Judge Beverly Scarlett had started. She's very connected with the Eno River Association, as she wrote like 2 of her journals for Eno River Association. But she has a nonprofit herself that's called Indigenous Memories. And so she is having a water ceremony Essentially, it's going to be open to the public. It's going to take place on Saturday, September the 21st. She's going to have music. She's going to be talking as well and having a couple of guest speakers. More details are going to be coming soon as she's going to be preparing the flyer. And again, we are a little bit a ways from September, but she has secured the date of September and the location, and all of those details will be coming soon. But essentially, it's going to be a water ceremony, speaking to the effect of how water has and nature have played a very big role in the indigenous culture, and the healing and spiritual aspect of that all connected. So again, it is a public event. More details will be coming soon, but September the 21st is a secure date on that Saturday. And it's going to be more so in the middle of the day. Again, details to come soon.
Thank you. And it looks like Dale shared that there's a public hearing at the Person County Courthouse on the proposed Roxborough coal plant conversion to gas by Duke Energy this Thursday at 7 p.m. at the Person County Courthouse.
Yeah, and just to add to that, most people, including the International Energy Agency, say we should not be building any more gas infrastructure based on what's happening to the climate. This would also be a burden on ratepayers here in North Carolina.
Looks like John has his hand raised.
Thanks. In the category of supporting things that have long been requested in the community, we are looking for organizations to support the City Council's decision to put a sidewalk and streets resurfacing bond on the ballot this November. So I have a link in the chat to a forum where you can this is for organizations to support the referendum. We'll probably do individual support later during the summer. It seems that the council is going to put it on the ballot next Monday, but they'll have a public hearing in advance of making that decision. We just want to kick it off showing that there is good support, community support behind this. And we're looking forward to being at the Juneteenth event at Lakeview Park on Saturday.
Any other announcements or topics for discussion? All right, well, thank you all so much. I'll be sharing a summary of what everyone shared, and the link to the presentation will go on the website. And thank you all so much for being here. Let's see. We are taking a break for the summer, so we will not have our monthly meeting in July and August, but we will start back again in September. That will be September 9th. And we'll be looking for presentation ideas. So even if you're a regular attendee and you'd like, it's been some time since you've shared what your organization is up to, you're definitely welcome to, request to get on the schedule. And if you have suggestions for anybody to join us, please share those with anyone on the organizing committee. And we are also always looking for people to join the organizing committee. And we meet on the 4th Monday at 11 a.m. To do planning and discussion. So definitely welcome anyone to join us there. Thank you all so much. Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for running our meeting.
Thank you, Justin.